Hey, if you're passionate about knives like I am, you're in the right place. Let's read about knives. How you doing? Glad you all came to stop by. My co-host is here as well. She's laying over there. Well, everybody can say hi to Golda. Say hi to everybody. So here's our girl, Golda, my co-host. She's gonna watch and supervise and make sure I get everything right. Well, the name of this video we were talking about is So You Want to Make Knives. And we're going to talk about that. This is probably going to be a series. There's a lot of things to talk about because there's a lot of people who are getting into making knives. It seems like it's made a resurgence. For years it wasn't, and now it's back, and everybody seems to make knives. That's probably a factor of like forged and fire and things like that that are creating the show. And I get it because there's a resurging interest. But when people start making knives, there's really three reasons you start to make knives, and you got to ask yourself that question. Is who are you making these knives for? And it really matters because the three criteria I've said here talk about who are you making them for. The first category of people making knives very often are people that are making knives for themselves. They've seen it, they think they've got something unique, there's something special that I can do, and I just want to make a knife for me. I want to see if I can, and I just want to make one for me. And that's a cool thing to do. I mean, it's that's what you want. The nice thing with that is you're not making it for anyone else to suit their taste or to suit their desires. The drawback sometimes to doing that, where you don't necessarily learn well enough to use that for making that knife yourself as the first step towards being a big time custom knife maker, making his living and all at it, is you end up doing stuff like this. Okay, I call it a zombie killer. Somebody started with a big old chunk of steel. They probably heat treated it or figured they were heat treating it and forging it, by heating it up on a charcoal and getting it good and hot. And it's not terrible, but the way you do that is you kind of let the steel take you where you're going to go. People tend to do that. They don't have a good design concept in mind. So they'll make it and go, well, it's a good zombie killer. It needs to have this arc, to get through there. And this is the zombie killer. But they love it and they can take it out. They'll take it out in the woods and beat the snot out of a tree and so forth with it. And they're having a good time. And there's really nothing wrong with that. As a knife maker, I'm glad people do because they're getting into making knives. But that's kind of neat. Which takes us really to the second category in that, because a lot of times you'll make this and some of your friends will see it, or they'll go out there and they'll watch you chopping away at branches and stuff and go, wow, that's really a cool knife. Can you make one like that for me? So you make one for them, and you figure I'll sell it to them for, 20 or 30 bucks, or I'll just give it to them. The funny thing is that the second one generally doesn't look like the first one did. It's close, but really no cigar. And the reason for that is you didn't lay it out to a precise pattern. You didn't really know. You're letting the knife kind of take you in the direction the knife is driving instead of you driving. So while you're working on it, you're trying to get this curve back on the spine. You're trying to make a curve that way. And when you do it, it tends to drop down a little bit more. So you get more of a drop point shape to it, or you don't get the belly in there when you're trying to sharpen it. And you know what? I mean, it's okay because the guy you're giving it to is tied up in it and it's cool. So, I mean, that's not a terrible thing for friends. When it gets into, if you start trying to be serious about it and start making real knives, and these are real knives, that's not a fair term. When you start making a traditional style of knife rather than this, it's coming out of my imagination. It's like a fantasy knife type deal. When you start trying to make regular general knives, you end up making stuff very much like this. And this is a nice knife. Maybe we can pan down and see it a little bit better. Okay, now we're panned down, we can take a look at it and see. This is kind of what happens when people are starting to make knives. There's nothing wrong with it. The guy probably started, it looks like he may have started with a file, and tempered it down, which isn't that difficult to do. In fact, I'm almost sure this is a file just judging by the shape of what's left of it. And he started to make the knife again. Now, because he's not, a skilled and talented knife maker, there's a lot of mistakes here that aren't quite there, that this just doesn't take you to the quality level of a professional custom knife maker's work. We'll talk about this one later. Um, so, you work with it, and again, the blade kind of takes you to where it's going. If you look closely, you'll see that there's a bit of an arch, and I hope you can see this in there. There's kind of an arch in the spine, how it comes up to meet the pommel and the handle. Where a pro knife maker would probably have planned his work a little bit better. Okay, here's a nice round piece of probably deer antler, judging by, the size and the shape and so forth. He went down the middle of it. He didn't draw at an angle. He didn't give himself work with that. So he kind of let the handle steer him in what direction the handle's going to go. He put in the finger grooves, which are something I'm not a real big fan of. To me, finger grooves on a knife, they're cool, and people think, well, they give me a much better control of the knife. The problem is with finger grooves is they only fit one set of fingers. If you look at this one, this finger is almost on the space between the two, because I got these chunky sausages at the end of my hand. So it doesn't quite work. That with the swoop down here, we can see where actually the guard came in, the guard and handle came in, and they were shorter than what he intended, because I believe this was intended to have a straight spine. Okay, and he said, well, I got to take it down to blend it, and you end up with this curve, because he realized while he was working on it, if he took down the spine to the same level, the point would have been in a different place. Nothing wrong with that. But also, if you look at it, it's rather crudely finished. The blade is not polished, finished through. You can see where there were scratches on it from sanding or filing or whatever he did to form this. If you look at the handle, you'll see where the pith, which is the dark area inside an antler, if you ever look at an antler, that dark circle at the end where it's cut off is the pith. That's where the blood flows through the antler, because it is a living part of the body. White-tailed deer have a very thin pith, so when you start to shape it, see how he brought it down here, and you can probably see the dark line section here where he brought it down because he ran into the pith. On a really nice custom knife, again, let's get into this because this is also stag. I doubt that it's whitetail. It may be sandbar, just judging from who made it. But if you notice, you don't see pith anywhere, because, well, the knife maker had control of what he was doing and designed the knife around doing it. And that's something that comes with being a pro. It's a nice knife, but you're going to sell this to a friend. You say, hey, what do you think of this knife I made? Well, that's cool. How much you want for it? He's doing you a favor. I hate to break it to you, he is. I mean, I went through that also. All right, why don't we pan up? So, a friend will buy it. And, he's doing you a favor. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, my early knives are embarrassing. Unfortunately, I gave some away, and I sold some to friends and said, hey, I'll give you $50 for it. And the $50 bought would buy me more steel or more handle material or more tools to do it. But I'm not foolish enough to think now that he was doing me a favor. He was buying it to be nice. And that's and that's fine if that's what you're doing, because it's for friends, but it's yours and it's cool and they want it. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's a good place to start. The people really that have the difficult job to do are the guys who are really making them to sell. They want to be a professional knife maker. They want to make their living at making knives. And that's a pretty tough row to hoe. It really is. There's a saying, and I've found it to be true. I don't know if the percentages are perfectly right, but the concept is 90% of the knife makers in the world, 90% of them split up 10% of the money made by custom knife makers. And 10% of the custom knife makers make 90% of the money. And that's because the really good, talented, exceptional knife makers, they're making huge money for them because they have a name and a reputation. They're the Jimmy Lyles, they're the Bob Lovelaces. Actually, I don't think Skagel did, but there's that small circle. that really have it down to where their name is something, and you buy that knife for that reason. You buy it because his name is on it. And so there's a bit of a mystique to having it. There's some bragging rights to, look, I've got an original Delaware made Loveless. You know, yeah, I mean, that's a knife that's worth a lot of money. Bob Loveless said that years ago when he was making knives, that he couldn't afford to buy the knives he made for the money they're going for. So there's really a great place to be, but it's a very, very, very small, minuscule slat of how they're there. Now, I know some extremely talented knife makers that make spectacular customs, one of whom I'm going to be talking to soon. I want to talk to him about making me a knife. It's right in his alley. He's the guy I would go to make me a custom knife. I want to have made a mini Sykes Fairburn, which is a kind of a cool knife. It's World War II era, actually pre-World War II, was the Shanghai Marines. And it's cool, but it's got a military bent to it, a military design. There's guys that are very talented knife makers that I wouldn't ask about it because that's not their forte. This guy, that is his style, that is his stuff. And that's the guy I want to have make it because I know he's going to understand and have an idea of the flavor on it. But you give a custom knife maker that kind of a job, you go through, you give him the things that are important to you, and then you let him fly and use his expertise and his artistic talents to make that knife. And I'm sure when I get it, I got a feeling it ain't going to be cheap. I'm sure, actually, if he's watching this, yeah, well, you're going to give me a really good deal. But, you know, I'm positive that it'll be what I want, and it'll be a treasure. But as talented as that guy is, he's not making the huge big money. It's a struggle. Realize that to make a true custom knife, you may have a week's work. You may have 2 weeks' work involved in making that knife. 2 weeks work that comes in, you have to buy premium materials, you have to have the sanding belts, you have to have all your shop supplies. On top of that, how about making sure your family's living indoors and eating? You know, maybe they have some lights on. You know, it's a tough road to hoe because it's hard work. And it's tough because you can't charge people enough to get to the wealthy point, despite the fact you have these great talents. Become an ABS Master Smith, and I think there's ABS Master Smiths out there. That's the American Blade Society, and they make some spectacular knives, and it's a very high standard to hit to do that. There's ABS Master Smiths out there that are scraping by making a living at making custom knives. So it's a tough road to hoe. It's tough to get there. And that is one of the things to look at. It's not a get rich quick type scheme. But guys who want to do that, they may be making these knives. They may have started with the Zombie Killer and saying, you know, I really do enjoy making knives. And they start to improve upon it. They make these. They make knives like this, and a lot of their knives come out looking like this. But if they're paying attention and working at it, they're building and developing their skills. You know, and each one gets a little better. Well, when you start to get there, you can't make the mistake of thinking that you're going to come out with a knife and the design is what's going to sell that knife, and everybody in the world's going to buy one because of the design. Because there's nothing new under the sun. And people aren't going to buy it. You're an unknown commodity anyway, and you've got nothing to match that standard to. So I always tell people, you know, look, go to the classics. Look at the classics. The one I started working with, and I never achieved anywhere near, but it started getting me to where I was understanding custom knives, and understanding it is to make the classics. Okay, a Loveless drop point hunter. Everybody has built one. There's a billion of them out there. A real Loveless drop point hunter is $12,000-$15,000. If it says Delaware made on it, it's got the girl in, you know, it's got the girl on one side And if you flip the knife backwards, it's got the backside of the same girl. It says Delaware made. And they're spectacular knives. Well, take that design because you know that design is recognized and respected. And work on building a perfect loveless drop point skinner. Once you've got that down pat and you can do it, and people will buy those, they'll pay reasonable money for that. Once you've done that, then you can start to say, hey, I'm going to modify this just a little bit. I want to see what happens if instead of it being a drop point, it's more of a spear point, or it's an upswept. Let's pan down. I want to show you this knife real quick. You saw it flash by before. This is a Lamson, okay, and this is a Hunter Skinner. I think he calls it a medium Skinner, or called it. Frank Lamson has passed since. It's been a long time. Anyway, you can look at this and see that Lamson had an idea for style of knives. This is the knife he built. I'm sure it's his design. But he had the basics down pat. He understood it. He wasn't trying to make something that was so way out that people would be impressed by, wow, is that a great idea for a design? Because knives have been around forever. It's probably man's third tool. He had the stick and he had the rock, and then he came up with, oh, this sharp edge here, I can use that to skin out a dinosaur. So, it's been around for a long time, so there's probably no new ideas in knife making. But he understands the basics and the way it works. And if you look at the lines and the grind and how perfect it is, I'm sure he developed the skill to do that long before he was making knives like this. Just look at the quality of the work. The stag, I talked about that, how it fits. He selected the right piece of stag to make it a very comfortable knife to hold. One of the things I always look at and get very impressed with stag knives is stag has ribs, and if you look, the butt cap is ground to actually match the ribs of the stag. You can only do that by hand, and it takes knowledge and skill to get there. Plus, it's fitted well. I do believe this has pins in it going into the stag to hold it, but you ain't going to see it on camera because I haven't been able to find them from looking, but I know they're there. But look at the shape of the guard and the way the guard fits on there, how it's perfect. One of the standards that I always look at, one of the standards, in my opinion, of a custom knife, okay, is what's called soldering the guard. And I don't know if you can see that or not. Let me get us a little pointer. I'll use this knife as a pointer. Okay, I don't know if you can see it or not, but between the guard and the blade, this joint right here, I don't know if you can see it, but this joint right here is soldered. It's actually soldered in, so there's no gaps there. Like you'll see in this knife, there's a gap. Okay, this is soldered. Some people actually fill those gaps in with JB Weld and try to smooth it in. There's a skill and a talent in soldering guards. I'm not one of those guys that can solder guards. I never mastered it. I couldn't get there if I had to. So if I was going to become a big-time professional knife maker, and I wanted to even be part of the 90% that split up 10% of the money, I was happy when I was making knives to cover my expenses. And often failed at that. But you have to learn to do those little details because that's what serious knife guys look at with a custom. It's the little details that matter and make a huge difference. So it does make a difference. Find out what's sellable. You aren't going to reinvent the wheel. Understand that when you're making knives to sell, that it's your business. It's not your taste that's going to sell the knives, especially if you come up with something that's, that's yours and your design. It's not the zombie killer. And your friends may look at it and say it's cool. You can think it's the coolest thing ever. But what's different about it that would make me want to pay good money to buy this? There's a million makers out there right now, including manufacturers who make what I call sharpened pry bars. Big, thick chunk of steel and a real steep bevel, and it's a chopper. It's a big, heavy chopper for chopping down trees. Hey, if you're going to chop down trees, you get an axe. But that's going to be it. And they make it, and it looks like everybody else's. And this is my custom knife, and I'm a custom knife maker, and people are going to buy this. Well, you're kidding yourself. It's not going to be there, because why would I pay you $200 for something that looks like a $69.95 knife from China? Why would I do that? So if you want to be a knife maker, it's a great thing. I wish you luck. If there's any way I can ever help you, talk to me. I'll be happy to. I'll critique your work. I am merciless when I'm critiquing stuff, but I'll critique your work. I'll help you any way I can. I'll introduce you to people that could help you. But frankly, you got a tough road to hoe, and it's not going to be there. This is a part of a series. That's the 3 big things. If you want to get into knife making, there's probably 3 more. I know we're going to do a series. I've got another one in my head as far as putting it together. When you see these series, click on them and watch. Give me some comments below. Right down there's this place for comments. Make a comment. You can tell me, Reed, you have no idea what you're talking about, or you missed this, or ask me a question. Whatever. Comments help to do it. Tell your friends about this. It might be something to watch. Viewers work. I am doing this for fun, but the reality is it gets expensive too. So getting to a point where we're monetized, to where I can talk to people about other kind of deals and so forth. I need viewers. I need subscribers. I also need a boost to the ego. Give me a post down there. Tell me that. Or if you think my ego's too big, knock me down. Give me a comment. I will see you the next time. Sorry about the wait for this one. And I think on behalf of me and Golda, I think she's under the chair. Yes, she is, laying on my foot. On behalf of me and Golda, my co-host, thanks for coming. We're out of here.